Fáilte. Welcome back to another episode of Crann, Short Stories and Poetry. I'm Terrance Ó Domhnaill, your village scéalaí, returning again this week with more stories and poems from authors around the world. This week I have 3 stories for everyone. We continue with part 2 of that Bulgarian tale about a girl and a dragon, then another episode of the Gravediggers of Orpheus, and a scary techno thriller called The Suff, which apparently is an urban legend on Substack these days, with other writers posting stories about this character. So gather around once more and let me read to you under the shade of the Crann, the Tree of Life. Now the first story, as I mentioned, is part 2 of Dragon's Wings, and in subtitled And Some Revealed Secrets by Mariana Bosarova from Bulgaria. As she said, this was originally written in Bulgarian in 2018. And for those of you who missed part 1 last week, Melina lost her mother in an accident in the mountains. Since then, she has had an insurmountable fear of heights. To her amazement and horror, when she turned 17 on the day of the dragon flight, the female dragon Elementia chooses her as a rider, but Melina runs away. What will happen to her? Melina asked, her gaze lost in the darkness. She returned to the village only after nightfall. She had nowhere else to go. Near the house, standing in the shadow of the heavy gate, a young man waited for her. Garth was an informal leader of the riders. His tall figure seemed even more massive, shrouded in the night shadows. The other dragons will drive her away, and alone she will likely die, he said flatly. Melina expected to find reproach, even anger in his eyes. There was only warmth and support. His dark curly hair seemed like a halo around his head. His steel gray eyes studied her carefully. Why? Why will they drive her away? Her voice trembled, but she couldn't overcome the flood of emotions. Can't she go to Dragon Island? Live there? She has chosen another path, Garth replied. Since you reject her, her fate will be nothing but death. Alone on the island, she won't survive long. You see how fragile and delicate she is. Did she tell you her name? The little dragon? Do you know her name? Melina nodded. A deep sadness gripped her heart. She would even have burst into tears. There's no turning back. You're not a coward, Melina, Garth said softly. How he said her name sent shivers down her spine, a strange, sweet thrill coursing through her. His deep, resonant voice was full of restrained emotion. How do you know what I am? Melina straightened her back, fixed her eyes on his. He looked at her, unblinking and unwavering. I know, I see, I feel it. He reached out to her and gently brushed a lock of copper hair from her face. The gesture was filled with such simplicity and intimacy. You're wrong. Melina stepped back and wrapped her arms around her shoulders. Are you cold? Garth changed the subject. He slowly took off his jacket and draped it over his shoulders. Here, take it. Melina started to protest, but Garth gave a brief smile. I'm fine with just a shirt, he said. Melina felt the warmth of his body lingering in the jacket. A fresh masculine scent reached her nostrils, and a new shiver ran down her spine. Thank you. Garth nodded slightly. I'm not wrong about you. You need to realize it yourself, Melina, he continued. No one here is rejecting you. You're the one hiding from others and avoiding them, but you're smart and strong, and very beautiful. A spark flashed in his eyes, and a brief smile appeared on his lips. Dragons aren't stupid. They know who to go after. Trust me, I've been a writer for 8 years. Melina looked at him. She unconsciously stepped toward him, drawn by his strength and confidence. She had admired him from afar for so long. Garth rode a huge, almost black dragon, and he looked like a creature from another world. You can always count on me for help, he added. Now I'll leave you to rest and to think. Melina didn't want him to leave, but she had no reason to make him stay. Thank you for being so kind to me, she said, taking his jacket off her shoulders. Their fingers brushed as she handed it back to him. She reached the peak, surprisingly flat at its highest point, as if a giant monster had bitten off the sharpest part of its jagged mouth. Low shrubs and sparse grass had sprouted among the rocks, softening the landscape. At the far end, bathed in the colors of the sunset, stood Elementia, wings spread, ready for flight. Light emanated from her, enveloping her like a veil. Her turquoise eyes shifted from the sky to Melina. "You decided to come." Her voice was melodious, and Melina heard it in her mind. "But will you stay?" There was no reproach or anger in Elementia's words. Perhaps dragons weren't subject to such emotions. Melina stepped slowly and hesitantly toward her. "Will you accept me again?" "I've made my decision. I cannot change it." She shook her head and flapped her wings. The strong sound echoed off the rocks, reverberating multiple times. Strangely, Melina felt no fear. She didn't look away, only towards Elementia. She approached her and timidly reached out to touch her golden head. The smooth scales shimmered like precious gems. "Do you want to fly?" Suddenly the magic vanished. Melina saw Elementia lower herself to make it easier for her to mount her back. The girl squeezed her eyes shut. Terror and pain overwhelmed her beyond her control. She trembled and sank to her knees. Silent tears streamed down her cheeks. "You must not be afraid. I will always protect you. The sky is a part of me, and flying is the most wonderful thing." And suddenly, Melina felt an incredible warmth, tenderness, and kindness envelop her, sinking deep within, overtaking her heart and calming her thoughts. Through Elementia's eyes, she saw in some supernatural and unparalleled way beautiful visions of endless fields, dense forests, proud mountains, and shimmering rivers and lakes. She was filled with awe and anticipation. She slid down Elementia's neck and settled onto her back. Under her palms, she felt a strange horn-like structure that allowed her to hold on securely, pressing herself closely to Elementia's neck. Melina buried her fingers in the dragon's scales, and for the first time in a long while, she felt whole and at peace with herself. Elementia suddenly leaped and soared into the sky. Melina cried out in surprise. The powerful dragon's body stretched out like an arrow and quickly gained altitude. The wind whistled in the girl's ears and whipped her hair around. She felt nothing as clearly as the strong muscles moving beneath her. The magnificent winds hummed, conquering the space with astonishing speed. Melina rose slightly and cautiously looked down. The valley seemed infinitely far below, and the people looked like tiny crawling insects. She was surprised that the height no longer made her feel dizzy. She clung to Elementia's neck, relying solely on her, for the dragon mastered the flight through the skies. They made a few slow circles over the valley before darting toward the lake. Its smooth surface darkened in the approaching nightfall. In the distance, in the middle of the lake, Dragon Island rose. Melina gazed at the black sharp rocks that crowned the small piece of land amidst the vast expanse of water. A powerful gust of wind caught them and tossed them around like a feather. Elementia tensed her body to break free from the air current and almost managed to rise to a safe height when another gust slammed into them, hurling them toward the island. Water below rippled and churned like a boiling cauldron. Dark clouds began to crawl across the sky toward them. Melina tensed, but suppressing her fear, not wanting to hinder Elementia. Lightning bolts split the sky, marking the beginning of the storm. The dragon tucked her wings close to her body and slowly descended. The wind pushed them relentlessly toward the island. They spun wildly, and Melina lost all sense of direction. She felt them plummeting toward the water. Her heart pounded in her chest, but a sound did not escape her lips. She wouldn't panic. She gripped Elementia's neck and whispered quiet words of encouragement. As if sensing the girl's support, the dragon made one last effort to shoot upward and then paused, hovering in the air. The brief respite lasted only a few short breaths before the wind caught them again. Elementia took advantage of its direction and let it carry them toward the island. Dragon and her rider completed their ill-fated first flight. The two bodies thudded onto the fine sand. Elementia twisted so that Melina felt nothing of the fall, softened by the dragon's wings she had rolled into. Melina quickly jumped up and looked around. Elementia's body lay sprawled on the shore of the lake. She knelt beside the dragon's head and ran her fingers over the scales. A slight movement, and two emerald eyes fixed on her. Melina wrapped her arms around Elementia's neck and whispered, "Are you okay, Elementia?" The dragon stirred and slowly got to her feet. A soft sound escaped from her golden snout, and Melina noticed that the left wing hung limply by her side, clearly injured from the fall. She looked around and began to tug Elementia toward nearby rocks, where a wide enough ledge offered shelter from the storm. Large raindrops started to fall on their backs as they moved toward the shelter. Thick, creeping plants hung over the ledge, making it even more secluded. Melina pulled a cloth from her pocket and carefully cleaned the injured wing. The dragon trembled in pain. She saw where the wing was slightly bent at the outermost edge. "I'll try to immobilize it, so stay still," Melina warned. She slipped out into the rain to find a piece of wood. Soon she returned, soaked to the skin. She pulled a small knife from her belt and cut several strips from her shirt to tie the makeshift splint. "Thank you." Elementia's voice in Melina's mind sounded like a sigh. "You don't need to thank me. You got hurt so that I wouldn't crash." "No, I was so caught up in the flight that I didn't notice the weather changing. Storms form quickly over the lake." She paused for a moment and then added, "I wanted to show you how wonderful it is to fly." Sensing a strange uncertainty from the dragon, Melina gently stroked her smooth neck in reassurance. "You really did show me. Will you fly with me again? Are you afraid after we fell?" "I am afraid, but I don't want to let life pass me by because of that fear. You can't control everything. Sometimes things happen, no matter how hard we try to prevent them. My wing will heal quickly. In a day or two, I'll be able to fly again. Don't worry. Let's rest now." The storm passed as quickly as it had come. The quiet night wrapped them in its dark, impenetrable blanket. Melina nestled under Elementia's uninjured wing and drifted off to sleep. "Hey, sleeping beauties, time to wake up. The sun's been up for a while." Melina jumped up, startled, and wriggled from under Elementia's wing. She saw Garth standing before her, with his enormous black dragon towering behind him. "How did you find us?" Melina asked, brushing the sand off her pants, clearly flustered. "I saw you climbing up the ridge. Then the storm hit, and you did not come back. Wind and I have been searching for you all morning. Finally, we found you." Melina turned, drawn by the strange chirping sounds coming from Elementia. Wind responded, his voice deep and rumbling. "Can they talk to each other?" Melina stepped closer to Garth. The large dragon approached Elementia and gently nudged the bandage on her wing with his snout. "They can in their special way," Garth replied. Then he added, "She's injured from the storm? What about you? Are you okay?" His warm eyes scanned her from head to toe, full of concern. "I'm fine. Elementia protected me with her wing." "Go ahead and take that bandage off her wing. Wind will take care of it." Melina looked at him in surprise. "Don't you know? The saliva of diamond dragons is healing." Melina shrugged, feeling a bit embarrassed. "I don't know much about dragons," she admitted, biting her lip. "You have time to learn," Garth replied with a reassuring smile. Yes, Melina would give them all a chance to learn. No fear would stop her. And that's the end of that story. I believe that part 2 was probably the last of it. But it's a good story, though. It's one that we could all learn from a little bit. So my second story is called The Gravediggers of Orpheus. This is chapter 6. So before I get into that one, let me take my 2-minute break here and listen to my little advertisement like I do every week, and I'll be back in a couple of minutes. During this break, I wish to ask for a donation of any amount to help me keep this podcast going. I'm fine with whatever you can afford, using whatever currency you want. I've set up a donation tab on the Crann Stories and Poetry webpage at rss.com and a donation page on my website at www.crannabihah.com using PayPal for your security. Don't worry about the exchange rates, as PayPal takes care of that for us. If you like this podcast, please like, subscribe, and share it with everyone you know in your social circles, as the writers I showcase in this podcast deserve all the exposure they can get. I created this podcast for them because I love to read their work, and I believe it should be shared with the whole world. Now, I want to explain how to find my website. Since this show is audio only, just write down the website name from the podcast image showing here and search for it. Visitors finding the website for the first time will reach the welcome page to learn a little bit about what's inside. You'll see the homepage link at the bottom of the page. Click on it if you wish to enter my world. Once on the homepage, you'll see the menu bar at the top where there are links to the pages in the website. Feel free to look around all you want. If you should happen to buy one of my books, all the better. Thank you for your support. Welcome back. So, here we are, The Gravediggers of Orpheus, Chapter 6, by Catherine Elaine. And again, she publishes in Substack, so just so anybody gets a little bit confused here. No, it must be a mistake. Run the test again. Derek shook his head in disbelief. I did, Doc Liz replied sternly. Hers and the dead woman's DNA test show they're not related. Sophie is one of them. No, I can't. I mean, she's not. Doc Liz arched her gray brow. She hadn't heard the captain of Vulture 05 stutter ever before. Derek, I was there when they first launched the Sophie program. I thought those were just rumors, said Derek. No, I know what I'm saying. Female surrogate orphans trained as special agents for the government. They used these women to do dirty jobs, wiped their memories afterwards. But she said, and she is completely convinced the dead woman was her mother. The other woman was probably a Sophie as well. Used as a disposable agent, brainwashed, then sent to the slums to retire. Doc Liz paused and took a deep breath. I worked with the Sophies when I was young. My job was to sterilize them. But it means, yes, it means our Sophie shouldn't have been birthing Anouk, Doc Liz frowned. But glitches happen, and human errors. Our Sophie wasn't sterilized properly. Derek sat quiet, deep in his thoughts. The program is terminated, which means the ghouls are hunting down all Sophies. They must have received a signal from the microchip planted in her brain. Can you get it out? Derek explained. No, Captain. I can't operate brain surgery. Doc Liz looked into Derek's eyes. I must report her. I did report we found survivors, but I didn't specify. Don't, Derek blurted. Captain, don't report Sophie and Anouk. That's a captain's order. Cap, you'll be digging your own crew's graves if I don't report, Doc Liz objected. The ghouls will find us, and they won't give a hoot we're gravediggers. I gave my order, Doc. You heard me. Cap, you're putting your crew in danger just because you happen to fancy a woman, Doc Liz barked at him. Derek blushed heavily. What about Anouk, huh? The ghouls will kill the baby. I know the guys will agree. They care about Anouk as much as I do, he said stubbornly. You might be right about that, Cap. Your gravediggers are a bunch of stubborn idiots, just like you, Doc Liz smirked, and Derek knew she was on his side. We have to lay low and find a place with proper medbots to remove Sophie's microchip. Our bots are too outdated. I know a place, Doc Liz suggested. It ain't gonna be easy to get there. If I wanted an easy life, I'd never become a gravedigger, Derek replied with his eyes full of gratitude. Vulture 05, the gravedigger ship, was being repaired. Captain Derek O'Connell himself, covered in motor oil and dirt, spent hours in the engine room with his crew. The ship was stuck in a dangerous part of planet Orpheus, and the captain wanted to leave as soon as possible. Captain, a timid voice spoke to the pair of legs lying under the engine. Derek climbed out with his eyes wide open. Sophie stood in front of him. Derek glanced over himself, dirty from head to toes. Unlike him, Sophie was wearing one of Doc Liz's white coveralls, like a pure, otherworldly creature coming to a clumsy dirt monster. I'm sorry, he wiped his own face, but it only made things worse. Sophie smiled warmly. I didn't mean to bother you. Just wanted to thank you again. Doc Liz says you insisted not to report me. She, Sophie paused, her face turned grim, told me what I am. I never had any childhood memories. It makes sense now. He couldn't say a word when Sophie looked at him, even more so when she took his dirty hands. You're putting this crew in danger because of me. Please promise you will choose their safety if the ghouls should find us. I'll surrender to the ghouls voluntarily. No, Derek said hoarsely. I must beg you to keep Anouk safe. Please, don't let the ghouls find her. Please take care of my baby. Tears were rolling down Sophie's cheeks. Derek nodded slowly. Cap, there's... Oh, one of the guys walked in on the sight of the other two holding hands. Go on. Derek stood up straight after Sophie released his hands. There's one of them locals, a big green guy, demanding permission to board ship. A Merblard? What does he want? A word with the gravedigger captain. My last story is entitled The Suff, in subtitle 2028 AD by Red Oscar, again in Substack. And his note here, as I mentioned in the introduction, the Suff has become an urban legend on Substack, one of which many writers have joined in with, and he's got a link here for other stories. It all started with somebody named Jeff Kennard and a persistent Google Docs file. Here's my first take on the Suff. Mark switched on his work computer. The familiar low screech came from the screen, as it flashed on with a white light loading bar in the center. He sat and waited for a few seconds, typed in his password, and the machine did the rest. A colorful ball spun as it connected to the VPN. Email pings were already bursting from the tinny speakers. He kept a meticulous desktop clear of everything, so he could admire the background image at times of high stress. The calming sight of a white sand beach, clear blue sky, and the endless sea. He didn't know where the beach was in the world. It could have been AI generated for all he cared. What mattered was the calm it gave him. Right in the middle of the sand, almost hidden for the paleness, was a document. A white page with the words the_suff.txt underneath. Mark failed to remember the last time he'd used a text file and promptly right-clicked the file and deleted it. He started his day like every other by checking his emails, quickly sorting into ignore and emergency, and there were no other categories. If ignore became emergency, someone would call him. His method saved time, and more importantly, his sanity. Email sorted, he minimized the application to recenter himself. Yet there was a jolt of annoyance. The file was back. The _suff.txt taunted him upon the pristine screen sand of his 4K background. If this was someone's idea of circumventing his sorting system, they were about to receive a strongly worded email. No kind regards, no hope you had a nice weekend, just a firm stop it. Mark deleted the file a second time and got up to fetch a coffee. He returned refreshed and smiling from a cordial conversation with Christine while the coffee brewed. He refused to drink the instant stuff. Downright vile what the company expected him to drink. Setting the coffee down on his cat coaster, he began to tackle the first task of his day, but there it sat, the file, back for a third time. That stern email would write itself, but first he needed to know who was depositing this file on his desktop and how. With a swift double click, the _suff.txt opened. Utter nonsense filled his screen. A jumble of letters, numbers, and symbols that meant less than nothing. At a glance, he failed to identify any words at all within the jumbled mess. There was no author data either, no traceable link to a colleague's profile. The stern email would remain a draft until he knew where to send it. He deleted the file for a third time and got to work, hackles raised, and a petulant rage bubbling deep down. Mark spent the day avoiding his desktop. The little minutes of calm shattered so thoroughly he left work early in the sourest mood he could remember. After an uneventful evening of a microwave meal and 3 beers, Mark fell into bed at the ripe time of 9 p.m. Exhausted and without reason, and the stuffiness of a cold beginning to form in his nose. He slept heavy with a single dream to entertain him. Mark stood surrounded by wet bed sheets hanging from a plethora of washing lines. Ahead and behind, left and right, all he could see were fluttering sheets, yet he felt no wind, no chill breeze. A shadow bled through the rippling bedsheet ahead of him, a dark human-shaped figure. Mark reached out, he didn't know why, and ducked beneath the sheet, but there was no one there, and the shadow was now on the next bedsheet swaying from its line. He snatched the next sheet off the line, snapping the plastic pegs holding it into place, and darted forward. Still no one. On and on he went, diving through the bedsheets, chasing a long-limbed shadow through his dream. He woke in a cold sweat, congestion plaguing him, along with a splitting headache. Rolling over, he checked his phone, 06:18 a.m., and sneezed. He typed an email to his boss saying he was taking a sick day, not that she'd see it given the state of her inbox. The headache scuppered his chances at more sleep, so he rose and figured he'd spend the day watching whatever new season had just launched. For that, he'd have to get up. He sneezed again, and a pain bulged behind his eyes. Groaning, he crawled out of bed, found his dressing gown and slippers, and slid to the living room to fall on the sofa. Moments later, his TV flashed to life, straight to the streaming homepage, showing one show on every title card. The Suff, with a picture of a man in layered black robes, 2 long arms outstretched. Maybe the file was a marketing campaign, he thought, and pressed play. The television went black. Mark switched it on and tried again. Blank. He groaned, sneezed, and tried a third time. His nose ran fierce, and he wondered if he had any tissues in the flat. The screen cut to black, and in the reflection was a man dressed in long dark robes, his arms by his sides, hands down by his knees, staring at him from beneath rippling cloth. Mark screamed and flinched to look behind him. Nothing. He sighed. This is a bad cold, and turned back to the TV. The old man leaned over him, arms spread and reaching. The rippling black cloth ensnared Mark. 2 long arms cocooned him and pulled him close. Suff, 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 the thing whispered, each word followed by a croak, and embraced Mark. The arms locked him in place and tightened. A rib cracked. Mark screamed and felt himself melting into the monster. His face slipped. His vision sagged and blurred. He tried to scream, but his throat had dissolved. Suff-ering. The remote fell to the carpet. Only silence remained. So those are my stories for this week. I hope you enjoyed them. So just kind of an admin note here for the future. I've been thinking about this for quite a while, and I've even mentioned a little bit about this in the newsletters. So starting at the end of October, after what the Western world calls Halloween, I'm going to be consolidating podcasts. So I'll still read stories and poetry to you guys. I'm going to do it under a different heading. I'm thinking I'm going to relabel this The Village Oak Tree, make it a little bit easier for all the English-speaking world. And at the same time, I'm going to run just one podcast. It'll be full of stories like this, and I'm also going to incorporate my news commentary and other interviews all into one channel. It's becoming a bit cumbersome for me to run 2 podcasts every week, so I've got to kind of spread things out a little bit and kind of meld things together. So, like I said, as you know, starting the first week in November, things are going to change. You're still going to get your stories and poems here, but this channel is going to have a bunch of other stuff along with it. So, appreciate you tuning in. And I'll be back again next week with more stories, and maybe even a poem or 2. Sláinte. Guru Mahagat. Thank you for listening to the show today. I hope you enjoyed the variety of stories and poems again this week. If you like the show, please like, subscribe, and reply, as this goes a long way towards reaching more listeners around the world. As a Shanké, I hope you will allow me to continue delighting you with a story or poem here under the Crann and beatha. Maybe they will bring you a smile, take you away from your troubles for a time. As I say goodbye this week, I wish to leave you with this Irish blessing as you go about your day. May your path rise up to meet you, and the sun warm your bonnet as you walk down the lane to the pub. May your friends and relations bring you a pint after you retell these stories and poems I give you here. Slán go fóill. Goodbye for now.